Thank you again for joining me on the Southern Report and giving me the privilege of your company. Continuing my political series where I am interviewing candidates who are standing for Reform UK, I'm very privileged, rather excited about this, to introduce Mr. Robert Reaney, who is the prospective parliamentary candidate for Bolsover. And Robert and me technically helping, and Robert will explain where his constituency is.
Hello
Robert,
there.
how are you, sir? Not a delight to meet you via the digital medium. So thank you very much indeed for joining me.
No worries. Thank you.
No, not at all. So if I tell you what, I'll start off with my usual UK map, which we're using for everyone, especially as we get some international viewers, and then they can place certain cities. But then let's come down to the middle there. Sorry, that's my mistake, which is the wonderful things about that. So this is where we are. So where are we in relation to the country, dear Robert? Explain what is around. We're bang in the Midlands, I presume.
We're Middle England, the industrial heartland. Chesterfield, which is the nearest town, is the next town down from Sheffield. And my constituency, Bolsover, is all under the Chesterfield County Council, and it's right on the edge of northeast Derbyshire. Geographically, it runs up the M1. So it starts at junction 28, Normanton, South Normanton down there. Runs up to junction 29 Chesterfield, 29A Bolsover Castle, and right up to junction 30. And the constituency literally straddles the M1 like that. It's just below Sheffield, the next town down.
Brilliant. So I just showed there's more of a detailed map of your constituency. Here we are. We are. Robert, what's the history? Just touch on that when you're saying about Sheffield, because for us in the UK, we know the importance of Sheffield industrially and the history, and other people may not. But just very briefly, what is the history of Sheffield? I've always thought it involves silver creation. Go from there.
Two main industries came out of Sheffield historically, which were steel and cutlery. Actually, it's a fascinating fact that it was so famous, the cutlery in Sheffield, that a town in China renamed itself Sheffield so they could sell Sheffield cutlery made in China, The quality of Sheffield cutlery was legendary for many years. And a massive steel industry. I mean, the rolling mills were the longest, I think, in Europe or something. And the industry employed a hell of a lot of people. The Spitfire cranks were forged in Sheffield because it's the only place they could forge them. And it was a massive industrial complex that ran down the main valley between Sheffield and Rotherham. But the steel's gone, the cutlery's largely gone. I'm afraid heavy industry's largely gone. But the history of steel and around Sheffield, as a result, to feed that industry was thousands of little mining towns and villages. And they were feeding in to the big industries in Chesterfield, Sheffield, Barnsley, Doncaster, But Sheffield's got a really rich industrial heritage, really fantastic place in terms of, it's the fifth biggest city, I think, in the country, and maybe the sixth. Quite a large population. Chesterfield, where I am, is the next town down, and it does feel more of a town than a city. But again, the steel, the cutlery were the main things, and all around was the mines. So, massive industrial complex. The Germans tried to bomb it out of existence, of course, in the war, but obviously failed. But the steel in recent years, I'm afraid, and the mines have all been closed down in the 80s and 90s. And the economic effect on sort of towns and villages around that district, it don't matter what you say, it's taken decades for these places to recover, which is why I feel very sorry for the steelworks down in Wales where they've just closed a massive steelworks. No matter what politicians say, that's going to be decades before that comes back right. You know, they brought enterprise zones in to try and boost the area. And for those who aren't familiar with enterprise zones, this is where they'll sort of mark out an area and say any business coming in and giving employment don't have to pay rates for 10 years. But you got a lot of transitory businesses come in and out, and a lot of the modern businesses, call centres and these sorts of things. Well, if you're a miner in your 50s and you've only been down a mine, or if you've been on the end of a steel rolling mill, those jobs weren't really, they wasn't really kind of any good for those people. So, economically, the area's had a bit of a tough time, and we need to look at kind of the future and new horizons really to recover. But Sheffield, famous for steel and cutlery is all I can say.
Robert, thank you, and thank you for laying out the history, because I believe that history is a big interest of yours as it is mine, as I believe it should be of everyone's, because it tells us where we've come from and what we're going through and how we can influence the future and where we're going to end up. So thank you very much for laying that out. Robert, let's get straight into it. And you've begun to lay that out. What are the concerns that the constituency of the area that you wish to represent? What are their concerns? What are some of the discussions that you are having on the ground, and they're coming to you? What are they saying?
It's early days because I've only just been assigned this area, but my constituency, Bolsover, there's no big cities. There's the towns really. Bolsover being the main town. There's a lot of rural farming communities in this district, and what I want to probably bring to mind, of course, which is now not happening, is the HS2 thing, which is a real Tory white elephant in some respects, because that was running all the way up the M1 corridor, all through Greenbelt, all the way through the constituency, kind of parallel with the M1. And so a lot of people's lives were kind of frozen for several years. Properties being bought up, people couldn't develop farms, and it made it very difficult for people to sell their houses or buy houses or whatever. And that's been a real blight right through the constituency for, I don't know, a decade. And of course, now we're not having HS2. But, still, they're not releasing properties and so on. So there's all that. And then just as we've got over HS2, which many people aren't even aware of, the National Grid have announced pretty much similar scheme, except for electricity pylons, right up the constituency. It actually runs from just below Derby to just above Chesterfield. It's 60 kilometres long or something, where they're going to be putting in these new electricity towers. And they've put this map out, and there's a big blue swathe around it. So if you live in that area, again, are you going to be able to sell your property? I mean, they're talking about this thing starting in 2018 and not being switched on until 2028, and not being switched on until 2031. So 3 years of construction, and we've seen from HS2 how these things stretch out. It'll be 4 or 5 years of construction. So total chaos for 4 or 5 years at a fantastic price. What do people do with properties in that area? Our own MP, Mark Fletcher, who's Conservative, actually is heading up this thing apparently, or the discussions in Parliament. And I can't see anything on his social media feeds about it. And yet he actually made a statement in Parliament to say that anybody in this area affected could potentially be claiming £1,000 a year off their electric bill for the next decade, which indicates, how long it's going to take and the effect. And this is all to do with, of course, the power, because around me I've got fields being double glazed like you wouldn't believe. You know, they've been glazed over. You know, got windmills popping up all over. And this is this drive to net zero. And the National Grid openly admit, I've got a little map. I don't know if it'll be pertinent to show it, but that is just, I don't know if you can, hang on, maybe make that out. Okay, I mean, it's a really big swathe. It's 60 kilometres long. And they're admitting that they haven't got the resources to cope with all the energy that's going to be connected in the next decade to supply electric cars and solar panels on your roof. And,
right.
And so, I mean, as a constituency, they've just got over the HS2 debacle. And again, nobody in the country was consulted on that, were they? Did you get a vote? Did I get a vote? Were anybody asked? 100 million umbilical cord to connect London. 100 billion. It's a lot of cash. I mean, it's a Tory white elephant completely. It's a complete Tory white elephant. You know, the effect on people's lives, just got over that. Now the electricity people are going to come along. It's all green belt. It's all green belt. You know, because they're trying to dodge the expensive towns to dig up effectively. And so we're making a hell of a mess of our country. I mean, fields around me are disappearing under glass like you wouldn't believe. You know
what you mean by glass? You're talking about solar panels, which is I'm assuming.
Yes, they're getting double glazed like hell. You know.
Right. I love the description. And in regard to HS2, for some people that may be listening, not in the country, but the fact we are talking about a fast train link from where you are to London, and then, as you quite rightly say, this has just been cancelled overnight with no consultation whatsoever. What would have meant? How long would the journey have been from where you are down to London? I don't know if you know that. If it was on the fast train, how much time would that have saved people commuting down there?
I'm told 20 minutes, but I understand because it's too expensive, it won't go into central London. I understand because it's too expensive, it won't go into central Birmingham, which is the only leg they're doing. So you've got to get on a train to where the train station is, and then on the HS2, and then off a train and get into central. So actually the time saving is going to be
zero. So Robert, you raise, right, so the blight of HS2 cancellation, a grid system that they, in regard to power that they wanted to bring in, there they are. I love that phrase, double glazing fields, left, right and centre, solar panels going up, windmills going up. And the fact that they're saying that they have not got the infrastructure to cope with the power sources, the power that the solar panels and windmills are going to create. We've got that. What about other issues on the ground? Are people able to see a doctor regionally? Do you know, are there long waiting lists in surgeries? Are people's bins being collected properly? Council waste? What are you having any of those discussions? Are they being raised with you?
Yes, I mean, there are people unhappy about a lot of things. One subject is the mismatch of local government. I don't think unless you're in politics, you understand all the layers that we've got. And so, I mean, we've just had a regional mayor elected for Derbyshire. And our candidate, Alan Graves, for Reform, who just missed out, he stood on the ticket of actually getting rid of the role because this is going to cost at least 10 million a year to run. And it's going on your council tax bills next year. This is despite the fact that every constituency in Derbyshire voted and said they didn't want it. So that's been forced through, in my view, pretty undemocratically. And that's another layer of management. And I asked Alan, is any of the regional mayors in the country, do they pay the way? Do they bring more to the party than they cost? And Alan couldn't cite one that generates more income than they cost. And we've just had crime commissioners, of course, appointed. Both of these seats went to Labour because there's this kind of apathy We don't want Conservative. And despite having crime commissioners, which are kind of a version of a mayor, but just concentrating on crime, crime's rocketing, particularly online crime. Knife crime in London's increasing. People are worried about crime. But the mismatch in terms of locality, we've got a Conservative county council, we've got a Labour town council, we've got a Conservative MP, we've got a Labour Lord Mayor and a Labour Crime Commission. None of these people talk to each other. They all don't get on. You know, they can't communicate. Right. You're on the other team, and there's a tremendous row broken out by the local MP with the local Labour council over spending in Bolsover town centre. Actually, they've won a grant to tidy the place up or improve the place, and they can't agree on how to spend this 15 million that's been allocated. And so local politics, it's driving people nuts, because the people who are meant to be representing them are just not communicating. They're simply not. And some of the decisions they're making take some real believing. Just give you one example, or two examples perhaps. The county council, which is Conservative for Derbyshire, 40 million overdrawn. 40 million. Wow. I know it's a slight overspend, that, isn't it? I mean, if I were 40 million overdrawn, I'd be panicking. So they've overdrawn 40 million. And I was reading the other day that they decided to spend 560,000 on advice from two consultants about children's homes. So let's have £560,000 for their advice on top of 40 million. It's got to be pretty good advice for 500 and some thousand. I mean, I'd want next week's lottery numbers. I don't know about you, but you know. And so you just think, where are they at with these decisions? Where are they at? I've got a little case where local people in one of the villages at Creswell have had their nice Victorian swimming pool. The local council decided it wasn't being used enough. Lovely Victorian 1920s Art Deco building. Well, it's been under use, so we'll close it. Within a few weeks of being closed, it has a mystery fire, and then he's had to be taken down for safety reasons, and then sold off to some mystery buyer. And so the local council apparently asked the residents whether they wanted it replacing. Nobody can remember being asked, by the way. And they give £1.5 million to a local developer to build a new leisure centre, and the developer goes bust the same quarter. £1.5 million, and then goes bust that same quarter. So they're given this, then spend another £1.5 million building this. And I've been to this place, and for £1.5 million, it's kind of a posh farm building. It's a big shed with a posh glass front. I have no idea, and it hasn't got a swimming pool. And the residents received the council tax bills this March, and the local amount had gone up 96% for the local government section. 96% increase. And I went to the meeting, and of course the residents are, you know. Yeah. And one old lady stood up, lovely old lady, and the room kind of went quiet because she was in her 80s. And she said, I didn't know anything about this until I got this tax bill through my door. And I went to see this place, this new leisure centre. And I went in and I asked what facilities this leisure centre provided for my age group, a lady in her 80s. And the girl behind the counter sort of scratched her head a bit and said, I think we've got some board games over there. And she went to a cupboard and got a box of Scrabble out, you know. 3 million gets you a box of Scrabble in Creswell. Wow. Yeah. And she asked the guy, the head of the council, I mean, I heard all this, I saw this. Do you think this is a good result? The guy never cracks a smile. He said, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, good result. She says, how do you work that out? She says, well, he says, you're out of the cold, you're exercising your brain. I mean, it was so disrespectful. She says, what makes you think it's cold in my house? But that is local politics. Let's have 3 million. Let's squash a lovely Art Deco 1920 swimming pool, and then spend 3 million on a posh farm building, or $1.5 million on a firm that's going to disappear. And somebody stood up and said, technically, legally, it's not classed as a leisure centre because it hasn't got a swimming pool, but they're being billed for a leisure centre. So local politics isn't helping.
No.
These sort of issues, the Conservative County Council being 40 million overdrawn this year, the local Labour Council spending money that 3 million buys you a box of Scrabble in Creswell. I mean, how the papers haven't got hold of these stories, I've never know, because the human interest element. And that's local politics.
I think this is where we come in. I would say to you, sir, that it's very important that the local paper do get hold of this as soon as possible. And then to say, as the Reform prospective parliamentary candidate of Bolsover, what are you then going to do about it? I'll throw in something, as a dear friend of mine has pointed out, and as someone on a personal level is very keen on swimming and sees there's such a benefit of having swimming pools. I was told that there's a figure of 5 deaths a week in this country due to drowning.
I don't know that statistic, but people should have access to swimming pools. In fairness, I've got to say, there's a great leisure facility a few miles up the road in Clown, 3 or 4 miles away. So there is an argument there that they've got the facilities within 5 minutes drive. But the way things have been handled, the local MP, Mark Fletcher, who's Conservative, I've written to the Labour Council to raise questions. I was actually at the meeting and heard the Labour councillor say, I mean, this is firsthand, I heard the guy say, I'm not answering any questions to any MPs. I don't care what party they're from. We're making the decisions. It's nothing to do with them. So as an MP, you start to think, you've got a council on your hands here. And this is the attitude across a lot of councils. I don't think the public understand that MPs are possibly the shop window of politics. You come to an MP, you tell them your problems. But if an area is awarded money, an MP doesn't spend it, it's handed to the local council to deal with. Well, you've got a mismatch here. You've got a Conservative MP, you've got a Labour council, you've got a Conservative county, and none of them are talking. There's zero communication here. Zero. They're not even prepared to talk politely to each other. So how will you then deliver results when you've got that kind of disconnect? It's just not fair on the public. It really isn't.
No.
So reform, one of the things that I pick up on reform, there's several layers of management. They want to squash this right down. They want to clear this up. The Reform candidate as the mayor who missed out was only trying to be elected. He's the current mayor of Derby, by the way, to get rid of the role, to get rid of this £10 million white elephant role. The layers of management need to come down. It needs to be much more clear cut. And when I look at these people who are deciding our lives, a lot of them are retired. And I just wonder what experience they have, what experience of being in business they have, because some of the decisions they make, and this is why councils are going bust up and down the country, of course. I'm talking about my constituency, but you've got councils up and down the country making decisions that you just think, where's that come from?
I would agree with you, and talking to other candidates and other people is exactly the same. They are raising those issues, Martin. So, sorry, Robert, I do apologise. So it gets so many great. In fact, Martin was my last interview, but in fact, I should get you. Get you two having a discussion, because this is what's so wonderful, and on one level, but not good on another, because the same concerns on certain issues are being raised. So in this, you sadly with this swimming pool and what has happened, which sounds awful, very condescending to this older lady, because the person then haven't respected, as you laid out at the beginning of this, the history of the area, the history of Sheffield. There's me calling calling it silver, yeah, but it's actually, you know, the cutlery being used there. But you quite rightly then Spitfires, etc., making the blocks. You're talking about our history, which people then, when they're talking to older members of our society, are not respectful of that at all. They would not be respectful of what relatives of theirs either fought in the First or the Second World War, etc., which is another subject for another day. But you're talking about those issues. So what about, people got access to surgery? Can people get appointments with their GPs easily? What about issues like that again?
Yeah, we're lucky to have a couple of good hospitals, but I was speaking to two people yesterday from the medical profession who were bemoaning the massive waste in the NHS. One guy particularly was talking about the massive over middle management. I think if people get on Google, free to check this out, I think the NHS is the 7th or 8th largest employer on earth. 1.5 or 1.6 million people,
Yeah.
250,000 middle managers who do nothing medical. And they talked about an hourglass. This guy yesterday described it as an hourglass. So you've got a big raft of people at the bottom doing stuff, and then this big balloon at the top full of managers doing very little, with a kind of narrow bit in the middle. There's great concerns about the waste in the NHS, and the guy actually told me several good ideas where we could improve it locally quite quickly, in his view. And I'd love to pursue those ideas. In terms of other things, one of the things that is happening, which you see, you just drive around, there's estates popping up housing, of course. There's estates popping up nearly always in Greenbelt. Thousands of houses being built. That many affordable housing, you know, what the kids are going to do, I don't know. I drive past housing estates with boards up. They say prices start from 280 grand or 250 grand, you know. And so vast amounts of greenbelt. But do new roads go in? Do new schools go in? Do new doctor surgeries go in? You know, is the infrastructure being put in? Honestly, I don't see much of that. You know, they're connecting to the old drainage system. They're connecting to the old grid. You know, I talk to these people. Some of the drainage systems they're cracking into are Victorian. And housing estates are going up in the greenbelt, the bit that they haven't double glazed, like crazy, you know? So there's concerns all over on the ground. A little old lady was telling me how her village just yesterday, the demographic in it has changed beyond recognition. And she goes to the shops and rarely is English being spoken, you know, Eastern European and this sort of thing. And she's frightened to go out at night. You know, she's kind of boarding herself up in her house as a bit of a prisoner. That's not England I grew up in. You know, and so there's concerns about crime, there's concerns about the migration, and there's concerns locally about the facilities. You keep mentioning schools, you keep mentioning hospitals. The housing estates are being built all over. I don't see the follow-up infrastructure being put in. Certainly no roads. And the roads we've got, my goodness, you know, the pothole situation. But I don't see the infrastructure going in. As it stands, yes, you can get a doctor's appointment. As it stands, yes, you can get educated. But it's all creaking at the seams. It's all creaking at the seams. I mean, this matter. Sorry.
I urge, as I will do, I'm just going to stop you at this point to give an opportunity to say, before we move on, where can people reach you? Where can they find you? How can they contact you? And then how can they then read your bio, your vision that explains more about your background, which I have to highly recommend. If we can, we just briefly touch on what you do now, because, you know, history is very important to you and you're laying that out. So how can people contact you?
Well, there's a Facebook page. Simply put Reform Bolsover in, and there's a contact group there and a phone number. On the main Reform website, there's a section that says find your PPC, find your parliamentary candidate. And if you go to the East Midlands sections, Bolsover comes straight up. There's a mugshot of me, kind of frightening mugshot of me, kind of a contact number, so on. And so I'm fairly easy to get hold of on Facebook, through the main website, these sorts of things, social media, basically. Put my name in, I come up. Google me.
And people can email you. It's Bolsover Reform.
Absolutely,
UK.
yeah. The telephone link, email link, Facebook, WhatsApp link. The whole links are there on the bio. Any one of them, I'll respond. You're speaking to me directly in 2 minutes.
Brilliant. It sounds to me, with what you're explaining to me, it sounds as though that you really very gently, very nicely just want to bash a load of people's heads together to say we need to be talking to each other, and to facilitate that, to then give your constituents a voice. In other words, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you're describing the fact there are other groups, other entities that you've got to deal with that are making decisions that the constituents have not been part of on the ground, to then get their voice heard. Here, do people feel there's a big distance between their concerns in your region to London? Do they feel that there's it's as though it's a different country? I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I'm throwing that out.
You've actually coined it. I mean, London is almost a separate country, and the Lord Mayor has introduced a de facto passport system, because if you haven't got the right car now, you're not welcome in London. I mean, it's a set. And many people forget there was a north-south divide report out, I think, I'm going to say 5 or 6 years ago, where the headline was that 90 pence or 95 pence in every pound raised is spent in taxes inside the M25. So the UK tax system, whether you appreciate this or not, is geared up around London. If you live outside the M25, the tax system in the UK treats you as a second-class citizen. Don't matter who you are or where you are, 90 pence or 95 pence of taxes in the UK is spent inside the M25. So the rest of us, what are we meant to do? And so when I listen to, I don't know, for example, SNP, MPs in the House of Commons saying Westminster doesn't represent us adequately, I fully sympathise. It doesn't represent us in the Midlands. It's detached utterly from the working reality on the ground. And historically, I'm afraid they've allowed a lot of other industries to wither on the vine. They're only interested in banking, finance, the city. Okay, there's this kind of Westminster bubble going on. Fishing's gone, farming's on its knees, the steel's gone, car industry's on its knees, mining's gone. You name every industry of any variety seems to be, help yourself, lads. Even the utilities are being sold off to foreign interests, and the railways and these sorts of things. It's just, London's a separate country. And do the people of Bolsover feel represented well by London? Do they? No, they don't, frankly. And the current MP, who is a nice chap, does seem popular, but how effective, how good have the Conservative been for what was a traditional Labour seat? And you've got Lee Anderson next door, who is the well-known MP for Reform. His constituency of Ashfield, he's my neighbour. Right. He's my neighbour. And he's raising some really great questions. He's talking about the history of the area and mining and what work people have got in this new green economy. And I can tell you, I don't know anybody working in this green economy, this magic green economy. I can introduce you to plenty of ex-miners and plenty of ex-steelmen. I can't find anybody working. Because if you go to these windmills and these double glazed fields, they've got little labels on saying made in Sheffield, None of them have. Or made in Chesterfield. They've all got labels on saying made in China or wherever. So, you've got a little bit of work while people are fitting these things in. But there's no industry around. People on the ground haven't got jobs out of this jazz. It's not a local industry. It's affecting us locally, but it's not an industry. It's not a job driver, despite what politicians are saying. I couldn't introduce you to anybody in this green revolution. I'm desperate to meet somebody, actually. Although, in fairness, a little anecdote, I was speaking to a qualified electrician who'd gone to great expense to go through all the process, which is extensive, to become authorised to put solar panels on people's roofs. You have to have training and qualifications, and it's a fair process. And he's actually putting a few solar panels on people's roofs this summer, but he's not pulled out with work by any means. And he actually said to me that if he don't pick up, he's going to go back this winter to fitting kitchens, because that's regular. So this green revolution, my wife worked for a heating firm locally, and she took the calls about these ground source heat pumps. And the complaints about ground source heat pumps, they're not that great or reliable. And if they go wrong, you try fixing one when you've got cables cemented into your floor and whatnot. These are expensive, and all heating systems break down. If you lose a boiler at the moment, it's going to be a £1,500 to £2,000 event. You lose an heat source system, it's a 20 grand time bomb. And it's affecting the value of people's houses negatively. And these things aren't great, which is why the government are having to sell them at us like crazy. Have a £7,500 bribe to have one. If they were any good, they'd be selling themselves, which is my view. But I've got a wife who's been working on the front line of heating and listening to the complaints. Frankly, she describes them as garbage. So the theory behind a lot of this is absolutely great, but the working reality of it, different thing. So yes, I've kind of gone off at a tangent, I'm afraid.
No, it's you haven't gone off on a tangent at all. You are expressing personally some really, really, really important issues. I think, just for the record, I think Lee Anderson, I think he is an ex-miner. I could be wrong, but I think Lee used to work down the mines, and of course, his family did. But you are saying this is really, really important. People need jobs, need industry. We need to produce and make things. Again, going back to your wonderful interest in history, quite rightly, you've laid that out. The history of the area that you are at, as in many regions in this country, is extremely important, and we've got to remember that. So how do we bring that back? Can we bring any of that back, Robert? You've laid out, and we've just got the last few minutes. You said this about heat pumps. I'd love to interview your wife about that. There'll be very, very interesting things to say. How do we get these jobs back? You made a very important point brilliantly. These labels don't say, made in Derbyshire, made in Bolsover. They're saying made in China. There's a clue there, isn't there? Maybe we need to have a chat with Mr. David Cameron, George Osborne, and all the links that they started having with China from 2011. But that's another subject as well. People do the research. How do we get any of this back? Do you think we can? What can we do?
Yeah, we can. There is ideas. Firstly, you've got to get the concept, the national picture. We've been turned into a service economy. Okay, we're deindustrialised, and we've been turned into a service economy. The problem is, when I look on my map, I don't know what map the MPs are looking on. Mine's got this blue stuff around it called the sea. So if I start a small business in this country, and 90% of them are small businesses, I don't think to myself, on Thursday, I'll pop across to France and service my clients there, or on Friday, I'll cover Germany. You know, most small businesses start in this country and think, who can they sell the services or the products to in their town or region? And so being a service economy on an island, and we are an island, one must not forget the geography of this, is not a great plan. We need to get back to producing something. When you consider how many jobs are created by the invention of the internal combustion engine, the telephone, the computer, the television or whatever, inventions create real jobs, more than governments tinkering at the edges ever do. And so looking at boosting inventors and tech and development is the key to go forward. And I fully understand and appreciate the concerns of people in the green, save the planet type situation. But inventions and the right type of inventions can coexist. In fact, some of them could help the environment, in fact. So we need to get back to a type of manufacturing. We need to get back to a type of industrialization. We need to be producing new products. And I can tell you that we are, you can Google it, one of the most inventive nations on earth. And if the right legislation was put in place, that could just take off again. Very few people bother to look. You look at the number of patents issued in the UK, it's been falling for decades from the 70s. Labour and Conservative have completely ignored this issue. China's rocketed since the millennium because their government have got behind their inventors. Their government have put in place little policies that help inventors. Our government and the UK, we've buried them in red tape. There's a thing called legislation creep, which I could explain. It takes a little bit of doing. But it's very, very hard now in this country for somebody to patent a new product and break through the glass ceiling. We've made it, our inventors and our technical people are not on a level playing field. And anybody thinks they are, don't understand the market. So the UK need products, and we can then sell those products to the world. We can sell services to the world, but we need to get back to a style of manufacturing quite quickly to generate jobs, to generate wealth. A service industry where 90% of your businesses are small and we're on an island. The service industry works for a country that's surrounded by other wealthy countries, Switzerland. They can easily sell their products to countries around them. We're an island. How does a service industry work on an island? All we're doing is servicing each other, and we've got a banking system that after 20 or 30 transactions, that pound's disappeared. So you've got less and less money spiraling down in a circle. So we need to get back to a kind of manufacturing, and again, respecting the environment, of course, but we need to level the playing field for tech, for inventors, and for new patents. The last two governments, Labour and Conservative, and there's reports on this, there's books on this, there's plenty of evidence on this, utterly ignored this since the 1970s. Whatever they tell you, it's been ignored. And you can get on YouTube, Google the number of inventions or patents by country, and you'll see the UK doing this for 5 decades. So when an MP says, "Oh, I'm in small business," isn't small business always the friend of the MP when an election's around? You can have as many MPs around my firm with hard hats on, looking daft, as I want. 5 minutes after they're elected, they forgot my name. They don't know who I am. And that's just a working reality. The public are going to see. Sorry.
No, not at all, Robert. Superb. Absolutely. I just love the way that you've laid that out, because just coming again, I keep saying it last few minutes, but I'm just carrying on. And I just want to quickly raise this because, when people look at your bio, which is really interesting because of your banking background, because of your accountancy background, but you run an amazing business of, you turned your hobby of vintage bikes into a business. And then
Yeah,
we were talking about how, restoring anything, creating anything, making something, restoring something that was in a particular state, to then into its wonderful full commissioning again, is such a powerful thing to do as a human being. The amount of satisfaction that you get from that, because I believe this, we are called to create, we are called to make, we are called to be problem solvers. And I just want to thank you for, I find that inspiring, and you are inspiring, because you are
thank you.
you're talking about aspiration. There's a frustration of lack of aspiration that we want to do. When you've gone back in our history, we look at all the incredible things that we've invented. I have never ever heard that about the patent decline. Absolutely fantastic to point
Thank you.
that out. And I have to conclude, I wonder if that had anything to do with us joining the common market and then the EU, but I can't, I can't possibly say anything like that or throw that out. But it is about enabling, isn't it? You've touched on that at the moment we are not being wealth creation, we're just being wealth distribution. And I
Sorry.
would just be quiet. But Robert, in the last minute, thank you so much for your time. And in the last minute, is there anything else that you wish to say that you might have forgotten to say? And I would be delighted if we could also do this again in the future. But is there anything you'd like to say? Please remind everyone where they can actually get hold of you.
Reform Bolsover. Just Google that. Google Rob Reaney. There's a Facebook page. If you go on the main Reform website and look for my PPC, my parliamentary candidate, East Midlands, I'm afraid my mugshot comes up, and I'm sure it's on dartboards up and down the country as we speak. Yeah, I mean, there are a million things to say, and we've all got political opinions. The main thing about being an MP is there's two of them and there's one of them. We need to listen.
Right.
And the public are telling us loud and clear they're not happy about a lot of stuff. Labour coming in possibly as the next government will purely be by default. And I'm not picking up any appetite actually for Labour. Conservatives have got to a car crash position, absolute car crash politics. As politicians, our first priority is the public. We need to be making decisions, reasonable decisions, wise decisions, to improve their lives. I'm so worried about the kids for the future. How they're going to get on the housing ladder, the education debts they're carrying, the next generation. Reform have got a lot of policies that look at addressing these things. Join Reform because it's refreshing. It's common sense. It's a lot of public people, 650 candidates, all with real jobs. And I hope that the public can see that we are reasonable people with reasonable ideas. And I hope the public will start to wake up to the fact that the way they're being managed is Frank, one short story in the last minute. The Northern Ireland Assembly has been closed for years because they couldn't get on. Despite being paid a large salary to talk to each other, they refused to go into Stormont. And I was watching a video, and despite them having empty seats for several years, their economy has marginally outpaced the UK economy. So with an empty parliament, they've done better than we have with a full parliament. That tells me as a businessman everything yes. I need to know. What do these people bring to the party? Because it certainly isn't common sense.
No, and also after they've done their philosophy, their politics degree or economics degree, and then go and be a bag carrier, and there's no life experience. And this is what I believe you bring. This is what, with the privilege I have to talk to other people who are standing, they're bringing their life experience as well, and they are normal people. Robert, I cannot thank you enough. It's been an utter delight to talk to you, and I would I get a spare moment, I would love to come down and visit your business. It would be
Anytime. Kettle's always on. Kettle's always on at my place. Just we get all sorts of people wondering. Kettle's always. You'd be more than welcome. I'd love to see you, and we could spend all day chatting. I'm sure we could.
We can. I just want to, as again, you know where you can reach Robert. And again, just say thank you so much, Robert. Thank you, everyone, for your time. And I really ask that you will find this inspiring, because it is inspiring. Because we need that energy, we need the positivity, and because we've got some very important decisions to make for this country in the next few months. So thank you again. I'm going to play us out, and Robert, God, it's just brilliant. Robert, I'll join you on the other side and to say goodbye. So thank you very much for joining me. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.